April England-Albright is supervising attorney with the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, where she supervises investigations involving complaints of discrimination based on race, age, sex, disability. For more than 23 years, England-Albright has worked in the area of civil rights, addressed discrimination in the workplace, and excessive use of force and police brutality. April, I'm gonna go ahead and let you add anything else. And again, she's also on the board of advisors for Black Voters Matter, which seeks to build power in Black and marginalized communities and is currently operating in 11 states. She is married to Cliff Albright and they have 3 children, Tiara, Jalawe, and Jelani. Ms. Albright, will you please go ahead and take the stage and tell us the work you're doing and how we can support?
Hello, Black people. I know this morning is probably, I feel like most of you here, we're struggling right now, trying to understand what this moment means and what it's calling us to do. Many of us are already doing work in our communities, and we're trying to find a bigger and better way and more impactful way to be connected. So the work that I've done, throughout the years has been to answer many of the questions that I've heard posed right now. Black Voters Matter it was formed in 2017, but it's an outgrowth, quite frankly, of 20 years of trying to answer what this brother Smith raised and what Brother Fortner was talking about. It culminated with creating our own political third party, right? Trying to find a way in Alabama to continue the legacy of Stokely Carmichael and others when they started the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County. I lived in Selma, Alabama for 10 years. And went there because I wanted to learn from those who had organized around issues impacting our people, and to gain an understanding of how we do things better. I was a part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement for many, many years, and did work there, trying to find a way where we could have some national solidarity around an agenda that could be manifested in every community that we lived in. And so I understand the outcry this morning, and Black Voters Matter is moving forward with trying to find a way where we can have a base to build power in our communities. And so one of the things that we've learned is, while we may not know what's happening in our communities until we see a death and the media, for whatever reason, decides to make it run the stories, this happens all the time. Even if it's not a result of a death of a brother or sister, there are brothers and sisters who are engaged in a hostile way with local police departments on a day-to-day basis. As a municipal judge, I saw firsthand the fruit of police unbridled in communities of color, right? And having to, as a judge, undo those things that I saw happen. But what I also learned, and I'm also encouraged by, and I want to say this morning, is that work is being done in our communities. They don't get the press. But there are local people who are dealing with these issues, how they manifest in their neighborhoods. What they don't have, right, is resources. And so one of the things that we do in the most important thing we do in Black Voters Matter is we identify where these things are happening, right? Where these acts of police brutality, where these inequities are manifesting themselves in utilities, for example. And we find the folk there who are organizing and doing the work. And we organize, raise money, and give them resources to better be able to do what they're already doing. And so we need to be organized, as Stokely talked about. We need to be organized. But we also need to understand as a people that work is being done. We need to find a way to know where they are and who they are. And even if I'm in Atlanta and this organization is in Selma, or this problem is happening in Louisiana, how can we find a way to support? And so I think that groups and organizations like this, who are coming together to try to find a common agenda in different places, need to figure out how can we collectively get resources on the ground to people who need them. Because be clear that after this situation this weekend, what is going to be needed is bond money, representation money. They are already talking about instituting martial law at the state level. when you hear governors and mayors talking about a state of emergencies, what they're leading up to is we are about to institute a mass level of police force in that area. So that's going to be something immediately that these communities need support on, because not everybody is on the streets burning. There are a lot of organizers who are there trying to uplift the issue around the police brutality and what has happened to these young brothers and sisters in these communities. So they're going to need financial support and legal support. And so organizations like this, where you have such broad, right, expertise, can find ways to bring together money and resources to those on the ground in these communities. The last thing I will say is, there are a lot of national organizations, right? You have the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the movement for Black Lives that came as a result of that has spent a lot of time over 5 years pulling together different Black folks. There's a new organization, ADOS, for example. You know, all of these national organizations are trying to help pull together Black folks throughout the country to create a solidified agenda on what we need to demand from our local candidates. And so I'm saying that here because we don't always have to keep reinventing the wheel, right? We can find ways to immerse ourselves in established organizations. Even the NAACP, people have mixed feelings about it, but they are also, they exist in most communities. You have an NAACP chapter, right? So there are already national infrastructure that have Black agendas that are trying locally and nationally to put forth and address the needs that we have as a community. And so I want to offer that. I know it feels frustrating and it can be helpless and it can seem overwhelming when the media turns its attention to our communities, but we do have some infrastructure. What we are lacking is the resources to make them become as powerful as they need to be in their respective communities. So I believe all things are local, all politics are local. And so while we need to build national infrastructure, it can never replace the importance and the need for what's happening in communities. Because in building that infrastructure, we have 365 days of good work that is happening. And we don't need to react just to the casualties that happen on the national stage. And so I just want to encourage everyone to be encouraged that there is good work happening in all of the states over this country with Black and brown people and other poor people and other communities. And they just need, and your coming together is needed because they need your expertise, they need your money, they need your time, and they need the influential spaces that you garnered, whether through social media and in your own communities, to raise and lift up their stories. So Black Voters Matter Fund you can visit our website. You can look us up. We are specifically going in communities trying to find who are these people and what are they doing and how can we help you? And so as we lift these folk up, then you now have a resource and a base of connection to amplifying and supporting these local organizations' work. And so I invite you to go and check out what we're doing, and I'm gonna stop now so that we can further this discussion.
April, how much time do you have, and can you field some questions?
I can field some questions.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is unmute everyone. And if you don't have a question, please put your phone or your computer back on mute so it won't be any background.
I guess I'll start. So April, thanks again for that information. As you were talking about, and I'm sorry about the baby in the background, but understandably, there's resources that are needed. And I guess, I'll ask the question that probably, we're all thinking, but who are these organizations that you would give these funds? I think you kind of mentioned it, but then where are the resources being allocated towards, and what's the accountability of the resources being allocated And what are the results of the resources that are being allocated to these groups?
Well, for our organization, we do have our own evaluation, right? We do have our own metrics, because everybody that we give resources to has to have the purpose of building power, right? It's not about, we're not interested necessarily, we're not a voting organization, we're a power organization. And so one of the things we do, we have staff who actually reside in the states. And what they do is they go around and they evaluate impact, right? They are looking at, and there's a swath of different areas of work that we focus on. We have helped folk who have initiatives around getting police brutality initiatives on the ballot, right? We were a part of helping and fund the movement in Florida, for example, when they got the felony disenfranchisement initiative that reinstated a lot of folks' right to vote. So we look for folk who are organizing on that, right? And so and giving them resources to build their infrastructure and capacity to organize and get support for those initiatives, two of which we did with Florida and Tennessee, then you can see immediately impact, right? Because now we look in Florida and we see how many Black folk, white folk too, but Black folks whose voting rights have been restored. We also now have a police initiative in Tennessee that required that they have a community citizens board to oversee these incidents of statewide police brutality that's being reported. So those are some examples of how you can, one, measure the impact, right, of where your resources are going, but also you can determine who becomes your partners, right? But we also have people that we align ourselves with who are dealing with utility issues. Like in a lot of rural communities, I have seen for over 23 years, where you and I in our community, because of regulation, pays like $40 for your water or $50 for your water. There are Black folks in rural communities paying $200, right? Just for some water to come in their homes. So we support organizations and we find those folk who are supporting those kinds of things, right? Who will help lift that voice, create candidates who are going to address those issues. Like we have organizations in Michigan, and we support organizations in Flint who are specifically dealing with the work around environmental justice. So what I'm saying to you is what drives the agenda for Black folks needs to be determined by the folks who live in their community. There are shared experiences that we all have, right? Police brutality is happening, economic inequality is happening everywhere, but how they manifest is different sometimes from local community to local community. So what we do first is listen to folk on the ground, right? We look and find out what's happening in communities, and we find those individuals who are dealing with and fighting to change those to bring power. So that's kind of the matrix, I think, is listening to local folk and making sure that whatever it is that they're doing is not just about getting somebody elected, but it is about changing the power dynamics within that community so that we can become more self-determined, in our neighborhood. So that's kind of, I don't know, I pray that I answered your question, but that's how I would respond.
April, a couple of questions that's on our agenda list today. Speak to Joe Biden's plan for Black America. Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, of course, what he has done is, he's called it, what is it? Lift every, so he's trying to, use, it's quote unquote cute. And of course he does the 5 swaths of areas that he believes, that we have been talking about nationally, like economic disparity, whether it's environmental injustice, criminal justice reform, which of course we all know that he was partially the author of, what's happening in our community, and education, and so the problem with Joe Biden's, little plan without real specifics is that he uses the language that we've been talking about and lifting up and, in different circles and saying that these are a problem, but without really understanding how are you going to slice in that, how to deal with the racial disparity that exists. It's hard for us to know, how is this going to manifest when you become, president. I work for an agency right now within the, with the federal government. And I've been working there for 8 years. I understand how these agencies work. And if you don't have a clear agenda of how you're going to deal with the issues that are affecting race, then we always get lost. You can absolutely have an agenda to deal with poverty, but absolutely miss the point that most of us are being impacted by that, right? And so your policies around poverty, right, or healthcare may lift up some folks that need it, but could still, if you don't have a racial component or an analysis to your proposed plan, it can overlook that you have an institutional racist perspective on why we are being denied access. So those questions have not been answered by Joe Biden at this point. So I am not someone touting that he has a plan for Black folks. What I see is a nice PowerPoint, but until we can get him until he can face some rigor around some people who really understand Black economics, right? Who really understand the criminal justice system and how it intersects with race. Until he has those people that has to face those folks and be subjected to that kind of rigor and questioning, I can't say I support it. It's just words, and we know what words do. We got a lot of folk always talking about what they're gonna do for Black folks, and it's very important this year because they know single-handedly that Black folks are this Democratic Party's base. So they gotta say the word Black, and they gotta say we're doing something for Black folks, but it's up to us to give the kind of rigor to make sure it makes sense, that it's something that can actually be accomplished, and getting rid of the disparity that our people so need. I mean, Joe Biden won't even use the word reparations, okay? You wanna talk to him, he will not even use the word reparations. Now, even if you're not supporting it, we gotta understand that we have a right to ask for it. And the fact that he won't even use that language, is very concerning to me.
And I printed out his agenda, the plan, and put it up on the different categories. And I'm glad you're able to speak to that. Does anyone else on the call have any questions in reference to the couple of topics? Go ahead. Okay. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Ms. Albright, thank you so much for being here. I have a question about how to push back on this holding the Black vote hostage narrative that we're seeing from wealthy celebrities. What is a constructive way to mobilize turnout when we know that Black voter turnout was down 7% in 2016, and that, us staying home is a significant part of why we have the president we have. I'm just curious as to what you think some on the ground tactics might be, or how we might be able to wield digital or social media to sort of push back on this. I believe that we absolutely need to hold Joe Biden accountable and make sure that he understands these nuances and that his team reflects an understanding and an expertise of these nuances. But I believe we can walk and chew gum at the same time and demand that of him while voting. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious as to what you've seen in terms of that conversation and what we can do about that.
I actually have a two-pronged approach to that question, because of course that's very dear to me, and I understand we got a white supremacist and a fascist person in the White House. So let me just start there. I understand. I'm not one of those folks who say you got the same the same evil. Okay, so I'm not that person. But I do think that there's a time to have that conversation, and I don't think it's now. I think in doing that, and because one of the issues that we find when we go around the country and we talk about voting, because some of the work that we do is voter registration, is that Black folk don't feel like voting matters, right? And that ain't fake. That's real, because most of the stuff that we have achieved in this country didn't come from voting. Let's be clear. None of us have gone to the ballot and really achieved through voting the kind of major milestones that have had the most impact for our folk. Most of that stuff has happened in the streets, right? Even the civil rights cases that have become milestones for our progress came as an outgrowth to what was happening on the streets. Outside of that, we probably would have continued to get Dred Scott decisions. So let's talk about first. I think part of our discussion in Black Voters Matter is to always be honest about that, right? We don't give an illusion that voting is the end all be all, or that it is the way that we've gained freedom in this country, because it would not be historically correct. So our young people and older people who are questioning this process, they are legitimate and they're authentic and their concerns are real. So part of what we do in engaging people is starting from a place of truth, right? Is that what we're asking and your exposure, all of that is real. But voting can be used as a tool for liberation. So how can we make it real? And so we examine it, and that's why most of our focus is on local politics, because people can directly see that if this police department is abusing my community, so we can change the DA who is not prosecuting, these road cops, and we can get a new sheriff who will stop the police from terrorizing our folk. So, so first you start there so they can actually see how voting can change their income, change the impact of the makeup of their communities. When they do that, when they start to reconnect to that, they see some legitimacy around voting, and we can engage them in a larger discussion around national elections, right? So the first thing I want to say in answering and how we engage people around the voting or withholding the vote is to accept that what they're saying is true. We can accept that your concerns about the Democratic Party, we can accept, because they have been abusive to our people, and we can also truthfully say that, voting has not been as impactful to us as we need it to be yet. So we can accept that as a truth and be honest about it and not overlook it. And then we can go to the ampersand of that, which is those things can be true, but our involvement in the national election, right, needs to occur this year because we have a fascist person who is a white supremacist who will also do even more harmful things to us. And not everybody's going to be convinced by that. They're just not, right? But that's the other side of my response to that, is we are not yet at the stage where we need to be letting the Democratic Party know that we're gonna go with them no matter what, right? Because part of their problem, because we're not even at the place, the convention, with the quite frankly, the nomination, although it appears to be solidified, that hasn't happened. So this time period between now and whenever they have the convention, we as a people need to be negotiating strongly with the Democratic Party to make sure that they got us in this platform. And so if we keep saying right now, we with you no matter what, why would they need to engage us? So part of the strategy that some people are employing, which is we will withhold the vote, is actually strategic. It's just strategic. And we can't be frightened at this point that that's going to translate to us not going out and doing what we need to do when time needs to come. Because I'll tell you this, what will help more Black folks come out in November and not withhold the vote is if the Democratic Party, through their candidate of choice, has a real aggressive agenda that addresses the needs of Black folk. And so part of what we need to do right now is don't turn our attention off Joe Biden, right? Or the DNC. We got to make them do right. They ain't ready to do it. So this is their test. If they want to show that they are really for us as a people, then what better time right now with what's happening for them to manifest and show us that you're real serious about creating a Black agenda. And I promise you, if they do that, you ain't gonna have to worry about withholding vote. Folks will feel like, okay.
Yeah, that VP pick is gonna be very important.
Absolutely. All of those things are very important to making Black folks feel confident that you are with us, right? That we have been with you but you with us.
Right.
And so I think it'll answer its own question, you know, in a few months. But we'll see how they respond.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what Black Voters Matter is telling them. We're saying to them right now, y'all can play around if you want to, right? But Black people are really sick and tired. And if this shit gotta burn down, right? If y'all white folks are so afraid that this man is a fascist and he about to undo your precious Constitution, then you better get with making sure that all your base, not just gay people, right? But their issues are important, right? They're important and they should be on the agenda, but ours need to be there too. Right. So yeah,
because we've been burning for decades, so we used to it. Like,
so we all
like y'all want to see how it feels when AutoZone and Target is burning? Okay.
Yeah. So all of our agendas who make up the Democratic Party, we need to make sure that they are going to be held accountable. And now is the time for those discussions. We got time to deal with withhold the vote, but not right now. That's the way that's just how we
Can
approach
I follow
it.
up with a question?
Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank
again, my question would be, is there a list or a consensus of exactly what it is? And again, I mean, I'm Black, you see that. So what is it that we would say are the top 5 items that we're asking the Democratic Party to tackle for us? And
what they need to do.
Where is that list that we could, because you can't have a moving target. So what are we asking for?
So I think what we try to refer people to help shape the discussions in their communities around what are some issues, because of course there are issues that are affecting them directly. That's important. But the Movement for Black Lives, right, created a agenda, the Black agenda. And that wasn't just based on a room full of 5 or 6 people who have knighted themselves as leaders. That actually came out of the closest to a plebiscite that we have, which meant that they actually engaged electronically. I can't remember the number on the top of my head, but it was a broad representation of Black families and people in this country. And based on the results of that survey, that agenda was created. And so what we do as an organization, because again, we don't all have to keep reinventing the wheel, is we direct people to that agenda, the Movement for Black Lives. You can look it up, right? And look at the agenda topics. And so what we are asking the Democratic Party to do is look at that, right? These are real, intensely identified programs that we believe will have the intersectionality with race that's needed to make sure that the federal government in its capacity can actually help bring about the change we need locally. So that's what we've been doing. We've been referring people to that. Movement for Black Lives, Black Agenda. It is a wonderful, robust development and document that we all need to be using to talk about, you know, how we move forward and change the racial dynamics in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So, another question off the agenda item. We see what charges the DA have put against the officer who was on Mr. Floyd's neck. Why can't the Black community get a police conviction?
Well, you know, the way that it starts with the way the DA, I mean, the process of how they convict, you know, I used to do a lot of these police brutality cases. And the way the DA, you know, because the way the DAs have a lot of power in determining the success of what happens in court, okay? And so sometimes, you know, these cases don't even make it out of the grand jury. And part of that is because they've presented a case, which, you know, in grand juries are secret processes. So we don't even know what's happening in most of those convenings. But they essentially present a case that's weak enough. And unfortunately, Minneapolis has already shown you that they're going to do that. And we just need to be getting prepared. But they'll present a case that is sure to end with the no bail indictment. So a lot of these police brutality cases don't even make it out of grand jury. Those that do come forward, how you charge a person, whether you decide to charge them, and if there's attorneys on here, they also, y'all also know this, how you charge a person also indicates the success of your case. They decided in this instance to charge him with one of the lower standards. And so sometimes giving somebody a lower standard could mean success in prosecution, which means that your burden of proof is so low that it's really hard for juries to come back with a no verdict. First degree murder and intent is going to be harder to prove. And so a lot of the cases where they have to, they pose that question to the jury, it becomes hard. But then of course we also know that this is a jury-based system. And so jurors who go and make the final question, a lot of them with their own racial biases. And if you don't have a strong and aggressive enough prosecutor who will ensure that we are on there and are on these juries so that we can at least get, a verdict of no verdict. Sometimes not getting a verdict at all is better than getting a verdict, because what that oftentimes means is that person can have to be re-prosecuted. As you see what happened to the brother in South Carolina, the cop first got a no verdict, but then when he came back around again, he actually did get a guilty verdict. So there are a lot of reasons why that happens. A lot of it is how they, how they indict them and how they present the case before the grand jury to result in a no bill, but also how they charge them. The heavier the charge, the harder it is to prove. And that oftentimes works against us. But we also, the last thing I'll say on that is, what's the solve on that, right? How do you solve that? Is we got to make sure our people understand this, so they can understand the need when they get those like notices in the mail to go to the grand jury, or when they get notices in the mail to be on the jury, they got to go. And we also got to politicize them and let them know that when you go back there, yeah, there's this concept of justice is blind. That's some bullshit. You need to be aware that your role in that room is to make sure justice is done for our people. Because so that means that that person needs to be equipped with the knowledge that when you're on a jury, this is your role. Because again, sometimes you will be outnumbered. Most of the time you will be outnumbered. But even if you hold out, right? Even if you hold out, it can also mean that justice can be found at a later time. And we also need you brave, so that if there are things happening in those proceedings that are not right, we need you to come out and we need you to talk about it, right? Be brave enough to talk about the disparities that are happening in these types of proceedings. We just got to look at this differently, y'all, because the criminal justice system was not designed, it's operating as it's supposed to operate, right? It is operating, people say that this is not America. It is absolutely America. The minute that slavery stopped, they used the criminal justice system to replace it. So when we see what's happening to us, it is designed to create these outcomes. So we have to make sure that our people know what this process is and know what their role can be, how they can be revolutionary as a juror in these types of cases.
Okay. Last two questions. How can you protect your family with your Second Amendment rights?
You need to get what you need to do that. We need to do that individually. We need to make sure that our families not only have weapons, because if they want to tout that we got the right, then let's do it, right? Then we all need to make sure that we can defend ourselves. But equally, we need to have that self-defense training. As a member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, that is one of the pieces that we talk about with people, that not only do we have a right, but we have an obligation to be informed people with arms. And we do need to have a section of our community that is equipped and ready to defend us. Like Black Voters Matter, when we travel throughout the country, we use a bus. And we go, and it has symbols of Black folks with fists, and we got Black in power. And we are going into some of the most Ku Klux Klan country that you can even imagine we're traveling into. But we ain't going there alone, y'all. We have our security with us everywhere we go. And these brothers and sisters are trained, and their purpose, they not only train other folks in the community on how to be armed and trained and smart and prepared with it. But they also provide protection, you know, for us in other ways. They provide protection for organizations that are holding rallies and protests, because as you see what's happening right now, you do have some operatives that are coming in and are doing things at these rallies to, you know, to create an environment where martial law will be called. So we have got to, as individuals and as communities, take that right really seriously. I'm not somebody who will, you know, some folks feel uncomfortable talking about that, but let's be clear. We need to be able to defend. I used to run a camp for 12 years that still exists today called Camp Pumzico. And we train, and, you know, it's a summer camp and kids come, and but our motto is come in peace, ready to defend ourselves. And so part of the camp is we go in and the kids have regular good summer fun, but we also begin to talk to them about the need and obligation to be ready to defend yourself and your community. Because as we see growing each day, it is becoming equally important that becomes something that we don't ignore in our agenda of what we need to do in our community to be self-determined. So
that pretty much cover all our agenda questions we had for you. If anyone else on the call want to have a question for Ms. Albright, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Welcome, Mary. Does anyone else have a question? Because Ms. Albright time is short.
Guess I'll go ahead and ask one.
Okay.
April, so you seen what we're doing here on this call and everything like that.
mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like, what would be the best move for right now? Like, once again, like going back to the question I think Albert was asking earlier and stating, what would be the first step so we can start being effective?
Well, I think that, you know, for me, I'll do a day in the walk of me. One, I am always making sure I'm aware of what's happening in my community. I am wanting to know who and what type of work is happening or needed in my community, who's doing that work. And we try to stay connected to those people. So that's the first, and that's the easiest step to take, which is what's happening in my neighborhood, and who is doing the work that is around that, and joining them. And joining them doesn't necessarily mean having to have a membership. It could also mean just even providing a little bit of financial support, you know, so long as it meets your own individual criteria of fidelity and authenticity and righteousness. Then of course, you know, the first thing I think people can do is support that work. The second thing is with the social media, you know, you can stay connected to the world from your phone. And so, you know, I am a part, you know, I have befriended and I'm a part of a lot of national organizations that are doing some really good work. And I stay connected with them, and I try to provide financial support or time if I can, like showing up to, you know, rallies and protests when I can. Of course, we're going through COVID-19, so it's not so easy to do that. But you know, so next joining the work that's being done nationally by groups who've been doing this for years and finding ways to support. But as a collective body, which by that I mean all those who have signed up to join this group, then you can identify collectively what kind of work you want to do together. You know, that's the wonderful thing about movement. It's never in movement work. It's never too much, right? We can never run out of opportunities to do work around racial justice. So you're not doing any duplication in that. Now we have a new group of brothers and sisters who want to get about doing, movement business. It's absolutely needed. And so you together can come together and decide what is it that we want to do? How do we want to help? That's how Black Voters Matter, for example, became, a group of us coming together and deciding after years of work, we want to get resources to our people. So we decided that's our purpose. right? Our purpose is going to be getting resources to folk on the ground who are doing work that would normally not ever get resources from anybody, right? So that defined our purpose, and we went about creating an agenda and raising money to be able to do that. So I think other than the individual things you can do by finding out what's happening in your own community, using social media in a way for you to stay connected, the third thing as an organization you can do is identify an agenda of how you want to help, how that you can use the talents and resources on this call in this organization to lend to these efforts. I will tell you that right now, there are so many things that we have to deal with. COVID-19 has certainly exposed the disproportionality or disparity in health. But as we see right now, this country is on fire, right? Yeah. We desperately need people to create opportunities, to give resources to folks who are going to run for sheriff and who are going to run for DA. We need that. And so I think that's a wonderful agenda or purpose for a group like this with this kind of resources, is to find ways to help local communities identify those brothers and sisters who can serve as sheriffs, who can serve as DAs. Chief of police are usually appointed by city council. So also looking at the mayor, who becomes mayors, are also important. Those are three positions that are absolutely vital to stopping the police terror that is happening in our communities. And so I think that an organization like this, as one of its purposes, may be, because I'm gonna be honest with you, there ain't a lot of work being done on that. I know that for a fact. With the work that we do, nobody is really paying attention to making sure there's a concerted national push to change the DA's offices, to change the sheriff's offices, and to change the mayor, the chief of police offices by virtue of who becomes mayor. There's not real attention to how those things and those positions can really help us go a long way nationally in changing the landscape of terror on our community. So I think that's a wonderful agenda topic, for, agenda item or purpose, for a group as diverse in talent and resources as this.
Last question, and the answer might have been just tied in what you just said. What candidates can Black Americans support during the political process? Do you know any areas right now where you just mentioned them three areas, mayor, DA, or sheriff, in which Black Americans can support, or even this organization here, we can get behind the support?
Well, after, a lot of the Democratic primaries have happened already, or they're happening in the next couple of weeks. Our organization is holding some town hall meetings. We just held virtual town hall meetings for Philadelphia, who just had their primaries last Tuesday. We held one for Georgia Thursday of this week, which had, and somebody just said the state attorney's office is vital. It absolutely is to this issue. And so to answer your question, it's kind of hard to say what candidates, because we're already in the primary season and people are running. Unfortunately, because we haven't gotten to the place where we are holding these people to task on their commitment to ending police brutality. A lot of folk are just running. They're just running. They don't necessarily have any kind of effect, any kind of link to being those people who are going to end police brutality. So we almost stuck with what we got, but it doesn't. So, but I will say this: after there's not an organization right now who has a clearinghouse yet of candidates to support. That'll begin to happen after the Democratic convention. So you'll start to see in August more lists of who candidates are. And you'll start to see, other labor organizations and things of that nature who will have a national sense of who folk are. But again, not many are focused on DAs and sheriffs in the way that we should be, which is why I think a lot of attention has to go to that. But that information won't start coming out until after the conventions in July. So August, you'll start to see the actual names of individuals. Most of them will be Democrats, but again, it don't necessarily mean they're going to be they're going to be anti-police brutality, but we still have to let them know that you may not have ran on that, but my vote is tied to that. So we'll start to see those individuals in a few months, the identity of those individuals.
I have a question, or question/comment. Hi, April. I watched Mayor Bill de Blasio, the mayor in New York.
Oh, gosh.
Right, you know, and he was a community leader along with his wife, and they were really committed to activism in their community. And actually, he ran off of that and was elected based off of that, and then got in. And initially, he locked horns with the NYPD, and immediately, right, and that just from there, he has been a beat dog and cowered down in the entire time that he's been mayor. So I guess my question is, you know, here you are getting behind this candidate that's supposed to have all the checks the boxes. He gets in, and then now what you see in New York is open season on Black folks, where you have officers who, not just white officers, but Latino officers also, who are sitting on Black people's heads, standing on their necks and beating them up, even in the midst of COVID. And, you know, like, so what do you do? I'm really frustrated.
Yeah, it is frustrating, because what we can never lose sight of is that even when you get the best and most progressive candidate in office, he's still in a military state of America. So, you know, which is a huge, giant, you know, bureaucracy that is very hard for, you know, those of us who have the best intentions. You know, even when I was municipal judge for a period of time, you know, and I would see bullshit happen, you know, in the court, and, you know, but I had to make decisions against these cops. And, you know, it can be quite frightening, because you know that even in their individual capacity, cops have some level of power, even with the best intention. People that we supported for years, who's one of my...
April.
Yes.
Can you start that over? It was a bad connection. So you were saying, even as after when you say it's frightening, can you repeat your statement?
No, but I was saying that it is hard for even the best people with the best intentions, who have a history of progressive, you know, types of actions, to go into a police state, a military state, and actually continue to be effective, right? And that's not just true for him. That's true for a lot of candidates who we know were progressive-minded people, but after a while, being the lone wolf becomes really, really hard to make sure that those progressive agenda initiatives continue to manifest. So part of what you have to do is, the mayor's office is extremely important, but he's not the only one. You have to make sure that you're capturing city council people that will continue to lift up and give a voice to whatever mayor initiatives that are in place. And just because folk is Black don't necessarily mean they're gonna be with you. So, you know, so we just the mayors can't be alone. The county commissioner can't be alone. You know, we have to replace the DA and the sheriff so that we can create an environment locally of progressive-minded people that will affect these local agencies. And so, you know, we can never put our hats, and no matter how lofty the position is, on one person, because it will not work. They will get isolated, they will be alone, and it will become scary, because at the end of the day, he's the mayor, right? He has some level of dictation of who becomes chief, but the council has to be a part of it, and other people in the community of influence, whether they're representatives, all of these people play a role in helping these folks stay strong in their progressive and revolutionary agendas. My example is my mentor, who's no longer here, Chokwe Lumumba, who became, you know, mayor of Jackson City, and his son Antar is actually mayor now. But the reason why Chokwe was able to be who he was, even as mayor preceding his death, was because he was immersed in a community of revolutionary-minded folks. And so the other thing is, while you need to help change the nature of the other candidates who will support the mayor's initiatives or the candidates' initiatives, we also have to make sure that whoever we're putting up for elections that we support are immersed and connected to communities and organizations that are also doing progressive revolutionary kind of work, that they have a community to be connected to so they won't be isolated, because that isolation will eventually wear them down. And even the best person that you love and have seen do some progressive things will start to take initiatives or be silent on things that they should be vocal about. And that's exactly because, see, Blasio, he's a lone warrior, right? He may have had some progressive thinking, but not being connected to an organization of people and doing good work as an individual can lead you to be a lone wolf making decisions as a person, a representative. So we put folk candidates who come out of our groups, right? Who come out of movements. Those people, no matter how hard it gets, they go in with the spirit of a lion, and they know that they have a community and a base that's going to stand with them no matter what's happening. So that's important. Candidate, who is going to be our candidates? Who are they connected to? I don't want you coming to my house talking about your ideas and how good you're going to be, because I know that if you don't love Black people, you're going to be an enemy of Black people one day. So I need to see in the candidates that we support are those who are connected to movement organizing work. That's who we support and give money to, give C4 support to, because we know that they ain't going to change. They're going to be accountable to the community which birthed them.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, April, how would that be any different though from, like, let's say Joe Biden? He would need the same thing, right? He would not want to be out here representing us and we're our laurels, and expecting him to be the movement. And again, I'm just piggybacking off of what I thought I heard you say, like de Blasio. If he has an agenda, and I'm not that into politics, but because I haven't followed that much, but he would need that same to know, like, okay, I'm out here for you guys. Are you out here for me?
Yes, and so we have to support our candidates, and that's part of that's what I mean. In other words, don't just elect him. Make sure that he has a community of elected officials that will equally support the agenda that he's saying. If we're in agreement with that agenda, right? Then I think we need to make sure that he has the tools and support through additional representation. Like, we can't just stop with the mayor. He or she ain't gonna be able to do everything by themselves. They have to have a community of elected officials who will make sure that the agenda will stand. But again, when we can, the identification of candidates need to be attached more to communities of movements and organizing, so that they also have a base. In other words, you coming out of my group, right? So you're not alone. You're coming out of a group of people already working with you and supporting the agenda that we created together. So that individual is also not alone. So we got work to do. We got work to do in making sure we elect a support of candidates who will support each other and push these agendas through. But we also have to have different kinds of candidates, not just career politicians who want to, who feel like they can do good and go in there and, change things. We got to elect a different kind of candidate too. And we haven't been doing that.
Yeah.
We wait for folks to come to our door and we say, what you gonna do? Oh, I like that. I don't know you. That kind of model has to go away. Because that person is not predictable.
It's Albright. I patiently have waited. I had my hand up. This is Sherlina Fields Hobson, Englewood, New Jersey. Hi, Albert. He's the next town over. My question to you, you brought this up early on about the mayors. From what I understand here in Englewood, New Jersey, Bergen County, This mayor doesn't have as much power as I thought he was when I cast my vote. What do you do in an instant? And I'm not anti anybody. If I don't like you, I don't like you. Albert can attest to that.
Right.
Okay.
Leave me out of that. Leave me out of this.
You know, I done kind of got sucked into a little bit of the politics here because I just finished up chemo and radiation treatment for breast cancer. And
Oh, God bless you.
Thank you. In so doing, I take walks because I can't go in the gym. And I'm going to make my point as quickly as possible because I know you folks have been on here and I know there's a lot of others that have questions. But it ended up, I almost got hit by a car, not once, not twice, but more than 3 times. And I opted for a flashing stop sign. And I fought for it and I got it. I'm one African-American, 67-year-old Black woman who grew up and was raised here in Englewood, New Jersey. And then I don't want to call them outsiders. They moved here for their own reasons, maybe their own agendas. But you said the mayors. This mayor, from what I understand, and I bring that up strongly, doesn't have as much power as I thought he had when I cast my vote. What do you do? He is, and again, please, no one on this forum, please do not take this the wrong way. He is Jewish. And as far as I'm concerned, and this is my personal opinion, he is going to look after his Jewish community. I'm African American. I don't hold a high office. I don't hold nothing. They want me to be on the Democratic Council for our ward here in Bergen County. I've been kind of not pushed, but kind of, you know, guided in that direction because I'm vocal. This little vocal, this mouth don't shut up when it's pushed to the edge. Never. My attitude is you can't fire me, I'm retired. You can't write me up and you can't send me home because guess what? I'm already home. How do you deal with the politicians and the council people that were elected or appointed when, like you said, they do have their own agendas? How do we get around it? We have an African-American chief of police here in Englewood. Now the city council president is now African-American, and we done butted heads. I stopped him one day. I said, okay, you can't run, you can't hide. What you gonna do about that stop sign? It's there for a reason. It says stop. It don't say glide through, cruise through, slow down, go through it. When one of these officials, parent, child, relative, or neighbor is seriously injured or killed at this particular intersection at the monument, then you'll see change. But I didn't want to wait for that because I could have been that victim. How do you fight with folks that do have their own agendas that I won't say unfortunately, but we have elected? How do we get them and push them in the direction that we need for African-American young people, Black? My son is almost 40. When he would go out in his 20s, I'd be scared to death. Sit up half the night, you know, toothpicks, eyeballs open, praying that he gonna walk through that door. He's been railroaded on a couple of times, and I went to bat. But I'm only one person. Like you said, we all have to join forces to make change. Now, this to me is, I hope something comes up. This man needs to be prosecuted. In my viewpoint, that was murder. I don't care how you shake or bake it. To watch somebody put their knee on somebody's throat. But how do we make change? How do we get around these officials that I can't say unfortunately, because again, they had their own agendas that maybe they didn't voice. How do we deal with that?
They're different, obviously, when you're in a community where, voting is about, how much voting power you have. So, all of that plays a role. Like, what's the percentage of New African people who live there, with Black folks who live in their community? What's your voting block? Who are our allies? All those things go into playing a role in shaping, the reaction and response from elected officials. But I'll just answer it also by saying Amelia Boynton, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with her. But she is, if you were, the easiest way to make you remember her is the image of the sister who was beat by the police on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Okay. And so I was blessed to have spent a significant amount of time, being fed into by this sister. She's powerful. One of the things she would always say to people, she'd give this little story, and I'll briefly say it to you. She would talk about a slave master who was being driven by a slave. And the first time, there was a mosquito that came. And the guy said, "What do you want me to do with the mosquito?" The slave owner said, "Don't worry about it. Just hit it. It'll go away." And he did. The next insect that came was a bee. And so he was like, they kept hanging around the slave master. The slave master said, the slave said, hello? Really quickly, the slave said, "What do I do with the bee?" The slave master said, "Don't worry about that bee. Just knock it. It'll go away." And the slave did it, and it went away. The third insect that came up was a wasp. And so the slave said to the slave master, "What do I do with the wasp?" And the slave master said, "Well, leave him alone, because if you hit the wasp, then the other wasps are going to come, right?" And so she would give that story because she would say the difference between the wasp and the rest of them was that the wasp was organized. And so the key to changing your community lies not necessarily with the mayor or the other individuals, right, on the city council. They're important, but the first level of work is organizing the community, because your voice needs to become the voice of many. And with the voice of many comes a different listening ear from the mayor and those around him. And that is why we always can never lose sight that we are as powerful as we are organized, right? And so the question is, when I see a community in harm's way, the first thing I'm going to look for and evaluate is how organized are we? Right. And then after we do the necessary work to organize ourselves, then we can deal with the power infrastructure that we have to get to bend to get what we need. And so I respond in a way that Amelia Boyden would respond to that question, who did many years. She died at 100. So she did many years of work, organizing work, is get our community organized on whatever issue you believe is important for our folk. And when you do that, you'll get a different listening ear from the power structure.
Okay.
Because they're only as powerful as we let them be. And that's the framework in which we have to organize our community around.
That is so true.
April, I have a really quick question. I'm wondering if you know about an app or a website that vets candidates at the local and municipal level. Because when I go into the voting booth, I'm typically going in after having done a deep dive online about, particularly with judges, with decisions, with, where are they on the Democratic spectrum when they say they're a Democrat? Because, here in New York, and maybe it's true in other municipalities, some of these judges are on as Democrats, working families, Green Party, and it's like, well, who are you really? So right. I'm wondering if there is something that exists with the Black agenda in mind, in terms of candidates in the Black agenda and where they stand and who they say they are, what their policy decisions or what their records have been. That's sort of centralized, that we could utilize digitally or socially for young people, for newly eligible voters, and for people who just want to get informed, but quickly, because even though Google is everyone's friend, people are lazy, and they're used to the instant gratification of an app or being able to open a link at this point. And so I'm just curious to know if that already exists or if that's something that we might look into creating, because I'm sure that between the many of us on this line, that we know people who develop apps or who are sort of in that space. And I think that would be a very valuable tool, so that you could see, okay, of all the people who are running, this is who they are, this is what they look like, this is what they say they're about, but this is what they've really done. Because
they are definitely national,
going in.
There are national organizations, like you mentioned, the People's Family Party, and those. So there are organizations that tried locally in different areas to create what they call, they endorse candidates, and usually when they endorse a candidate, they're representing to people that they represent the values of that organization. I grew up in Alabama, that's my home. And that's home to, you know, some political apparatuses called like New South Coalition, the Citizens Coalition, and the Alabama Democratic Party, which are all Black-led organizations. Their main role, if you participate with these groups, is to vet candidates and create sample ballots that they believe reflect and address Black issues. So I give those examples because there are apparatus out there that deal specifically with vetting candidates, and vetting candidates that are in alignment with the values of those organizations. And so again, I don't know if we have to necessarily duplicate that work, but I do think there needs to be, in your state, identifications of individuals, of groups like that who are doing that work. They don't exist everywhere. For example, in Georgia, we don't have a lot of organizations that do that, right? We unfortunately are one of those states, while, you know, there's a lot of, you know, black folks are moving here, and we're changing the landscape of the voting demographics. There's still not a lot of groups that identify candidates. So that's a void that Black Voters Matter, for example, is trying to create in each of the states that we work in, is trying to identify these local groups who are doing the work, and then connecting those groups together so they can begin to vet candidates in a way that can create a ballot, or at least endorsing folk who we believe are going to create the agendas we need, until we can get the space of creating candidates from our own organizations and movement work. So right now, there, you know, other than the Families Movement Party, there are certainly the labor organizations, you know, who also, you know, endorse candidates. There's not a lot of, unfortunately, groups who will be that intricate in their vetting of people. And that's something that Black Voters Matter is trying to change desperately, in our work. So, but, you know, that's yet to come. But again, in a couple of months, you're going to start to see an outflow of that kind of information about candidates. Unfortunately, we're behind the 8 ball this year because these folk are already, you know, they've already qualified, they already run. So
Right. April, I just want to say thank you so much. I know you had a hard, April actually has another meeting that started at 1 o'clock and has stayed with us for an additional 20 minutes. So we are so grateful to you, and thank you so much. We hope to have you come back again because, you know, I know there are a lot of other questions and topics that we didn't get to address, and we'd love to have you come back, and thank you a million times.
Okay. Thank y'all. And I just want to say that we are powerful. We are powerful people. It is remarkable that despite all that's been against us, that we have continued to rise and continue to serve as a beacon of liberation for folks all around the world. This is just our time. This is just our time to come up in this movement and do the things that our ancestors have already done. But we can do this, y'all. You know, we got, our history shows that we can do this. So y'all be blessed and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, April. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think just to expound on what April had said, I think it's really important, and I think we're on point. Tambisa, Taish, Jerry, the rest of the clan, in regards to formalizing a plan, but also making sure that we identify key candidates or people that speak on behalf of what we're trying to make sure is done on a legislative level, because that is what's going to speak to the power and strength in numbers. What we're seeing right now is an uprise, an uproar, outrage of individuals that have been so squashed. And it's not just Black folks. We're talking about young people are out there who feel like their voice has not been heard. And in that, you do have these people that really maximize on the vulnerabilities of these young voices on bringing that rage out in a way that it's uncontrollable. We have not organized, period. We can say all day long about, oh, the elders, the civil rights movement ain't working. But one thing that they did do was mobilize and trained those young people back in the 60s on how to deal with certain encounters and not be swayed in a negative sense, because the whole country will be viewing and judging you based upon your reaction.
Yeah.
And right now, people are judging on the reaction, not on the root of the problem anymore, but the reaction. And part of that is, do we have organizations that are out there that are saying, look, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to really conduct yourselves, or deal with when outside penetrators are coming in to set shit on fire, to antagonize the police. They're making you look bad because they have their own agenda. And we need to really consider that. You know, I mentioned a master class in organization. Have we heard that? Has anyone done that? All these key Black organizations as NAACP and Urban League and Rainbow Push and all these other organizations, they're so quick to have a media slot for a sound bite. But what are they really doing to help a lot of these young people who really want to get involved with activism, but they really don't understand the repercussions of what that looks like, period. And FOP, I mentioned the FOP, that is your gang. That is what you're fighting against. That is what these mayors are fighting against, is the FOP. The FOP is probably one of the most influential unions in the country because it protects their law enforcement, their police officers, to do whatever they see fit. And then when you're going through the prosecution end of it, they are funding their bail money, they're funding their law and their legal fees, they're funding their lifestyle while they wait for their court date. FOP has millions, and they're one of the key organizations that's behind all this bullshit. And they are responsible for sometimes locking the hands of some of these mayors. It's not as simple as, I'm gonna go against that. You're dealing with unions. You're dealing with cities and municipalities that have signed contracts with these unions.
So I have a question. So what, if I'm hearing you correctly, and also reflecting back on what April said, because a big question that comes up all the time is, why is it that, you know, more isn't being done to about police brutality? Why is it acceptable? And so what I'm hearing you say is that people there are changes that should be implemented, but there's this union that is saying, no, you won't implement it. No, we won't allow change. No, we will continue to terrorize Black people. And that's just the way that it is. Because you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need to see a wall. I don't need to see a wall of white people standing in front of 5 million Black people saying in front of the police, saying, we're going to protect these people. You can't do anything to them. That's ridiculous. That is absolute insanity. Like, at the end of the day, we are clear that this is coming from a place of, well, we just should be allowed to do this, and that's just the way that it is. So what I'm hearing you say is, I think I'm hearing you speak to that, saying that there's a union that's saying, no, we want to keep it this way, and that's the way that it is.
Correct.
What's the fulcrum, though? Because if there's a contract between the FOP and the city, then how do we wedge ourselves between that, or say that, you know, this contract is not subject to renewal unless certain changes happen within the FOP? Like, what is the fulcrum, right? At some point, there is something that will then have the FOP have to take a step back and reevaluate. Is anyone applying that pressure? That's the question. Because there's always somebody with more money than the FOP. It's just a matter of, are we galvanizing those, you know, monetary resources?
And is it the FOP, or who is it? Who's at the core of this thing that's keeping this thing as the status quo that keeps Black people terrorized in this country?
Well,
I think it's a mix. I think it's the FOP. I think it's the DA's office. I think it's, you know, it's a web. It's not just one entity.
It is. And then also what it is no different than school districts. The employees, school districts or police officers pay the union. The union then have their lobbyists then go change legislation to take the rights away from the parents and the community members.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are. So it is multi-layered. So you do have to, again,
No,
loss.
but that's why I'm asking. She specifically identified FOP, which is the first time that that's been identified, and I'm asking for like specifically who. I was asking specifically about Mary elaborating on FOP as it pertains to the question, and who else is it that we need to understand is keeping this status quo of terror on the Black community?
Oh, well, you know,
Mary, hold
FOP,
that thought 1 second. I want to respect everyone's time. It was supposed to be a 90-minute call. We are at 89 minutes now. So if anyone needs to disconnect, we understand. And so Mary, go ahead.
so Fraternal Order of Police, FOP, they are basically the union for most police officers and law enforcement who, you know, just like any other union, whether you are a bus driver, whether you are a teacher, they are basically a major part of how their officers and their members are going to deal with everything from their pay to their benefits to even in misconduct situations when they are coming in to be questioned. They are that front line. Give you a perfect example. FOP right now, Chicago City Council has not signed the new FOP contract. We've been kind of like in limbo for the last couple of years. And because of that, they have that kind of influence to say, well, hey, you know what? We're still here. You all are not signed the contract. So what we've been seeing is more and more officers not really responding or pushing the pressure on certain arrests. So someone can be mugging an old lady across the street, and you might have a Chicago police vehicle right across the street acting like they ain't saw shit, you know, because they feel like, well, since you all want to be so protective of everyone, then we're only going to respond to the calls that are the most dire, you know, the calls that, okay, we don't have any other choice but to respond to. And then anything that's less violent related, we'll just, you know, we'll respond to that on a second to basis. And I've seen this from experience. So ever since we've had to deal with so many payouts, I mean, when I tell you we're looking in the $600 million range for the city of Chicago paying out in settlements regarding police brutality, the FOP has for decades played an instrumental role in that. And when I say, I'm just speaking from Chicago, they do the same thing in all these other cities. So I'm very surprised that they have not said anything as of late based upon what we've seen the last 3 days with these protests. They will. They're just gathering what their official statement's going to be. And that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with that organization. You're dealing with the National Organization of Law Enforcement. They are their own particular structure. Like the sister April said, it breaks it down. You have so many states, you have like several African-American states attorneys that have actually band together on how they're dealing with the in-house racism of members of the law enforcement and also the members on their staff who have been used to having a certain system of bringing their numbers down by incarcerating more people of color. So you have these African-American DAs or African-American state attorneys like ours, Kim Foxx, they went after her big time. And then you have the sister down in St. Louis and the sister down in Baltimore, and they're also dealing with a lot of inbred racism that has gone on for decades where they're trying to change the system from within. So like April said, we have to make sure we identify these particular offices. And if they're an incumbent and they're doing what they have to do to make sure criminal justice is fair for us, and I say for us, because some of these unions, they might say, oh, people of color, but they're not quite the ratio for us. They might have more of a ratio for the Latinx community,
right,
as opposed to us.
Right.
So that's why I think Brilliant Minds is so unique in itself, that it speaks to, hey, we're talking about us. We're talking about, we need to be a lot more progressive and a lot more proactive in our ability to consciously and publicly be intelligent enough to identify these key offices, what they stand for. Michael shot up some links. Tambisa has a beautiful idea. I love that, because you do have certain sites. Now, here's another thing, and I'm gonna let it go, Jerry. What we've had to deal with here in Chicago, very political town, very political state. Everything's politics, 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 right? It's like a daily soap opera here. And we have these so-called activists and political operatives that around election time, they will put out what they call a political slate or a soul slate. And what they'll do is they'll identify these key offices and say, well, this is our candidate in the automatic race for this ward. This is our candidate for this congressional office. This is our candidate. And what will happen is that these are people that find a revenue stream to say, hey, I got these followers, they follow me, and it might cost you $500 to maybe see if you want to get on this little piece of card.
Right.
That to me is so shitty, because most of the time the average voter is not going to pay attention to their card, right?
They're just going to run down.
Exactly. And then you have the political people, they don't do their research enough to understand that this person who's shaking you down really don't have that level of influence, but all they know egotistically wise is, I just got to have my name on this, right? Because I don't want it to look like I'm not being supported by this particular political operative. And I say operative because this is a person that will play two sides of the fence.
That's right.
They'll go,
that's right.
They'll go with the highest bidder, right? And they'll mask themselves into this whole cloak and dagger of, I'm for the people. And we have those here that'll do that. And it's just such a clown show, because there is no other organization that with our voices, our influences, our impact, that can be another real voice, or just really another option for people to tap into and say, okay, I see what you're doing over here, but let me tap into Brilliant Minds. Let me go to their link, and let me go to Illinois and see what their election. Let me go to New
feel
York.
like we need to be that exactly. Impartial but partial in terms of the Black agenda. To say, look, whatever you're being handed, on the streets prior to election, like, fact check that against this.
Like Emily's List. Look at Emily's List.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how we need to model. Emily's List is basically, they'll tell you, oh, it's a diversity of women. It's a women's advocacy group that targets which candidates they want to support and have more women voices on the legislative side. But when you look at some of the candidates they're supporting, to me, predominantly white candidates with a sprinkle of maybe non-white candidates. But still the same, Emily's List has become a very, very credible and legitimate source of political power in DC. And once you're endorsed by them, they might go ahead and cut you a check. Most of the time they will, because they have donors that donate to them to do exactly what they want to do, and that is to support their key female candidate of choice, right? And that has to be a building block for Brilliant Minds.
So could I just need to ask so I could be clear, because again, I was invited to this without knowing exactly what this, what the group was about. So could I, from what I'm hearing, is the majority, this started before this George Floyd thing, right? Okay. Now, is this primarily about the political system and the criminal justice system in America, or is there a broader, I don't know, is it broader than that? Or is it primarily for the criminal justice system?
Jerry, you'll take it.
Let me speak from here. Looking at the economics, political, legal, media, and education. But it's just hot right now with the killing, and we really probably got formed right after the Albury, I think, or it might have been right before that. So but it's just these issues are right in our face, and we're seeing that it can be an injustice because of both DAs being very lame and not coming forth with the charges. So that was thrust us right into the political landscape, saying, how do we change that? And with that, everything costs money. So that's the economics piece.
So,
Tish, you can speak more on that if you want to go into it anymore.
okay, because and it's what I heard from April. It's funny, social media gets around quick, and I have a lawyer who helps me with my firm, and he actually spoke about the same exact thing that April was saying. So it kind of like corroborated with what he was saying, is that if we come with these heavy charges, now you have to prove intent, and you got the jury and all that. The lesser charge is a more of a potential for a conviction, because I don't know. I'm not.
Well, it's two-sided. It's two-sided. True, it's low-bearing fruit. True, but the other side, he's letting the union know, I'm still your friend. I'm still protecting you. That's the real game.
He being who?
The DA.
DA.
So understand this right here. The issue is that it's based on the charges the DA put in front of the grand jury or the jury if you really can get a conviction.
But
they know based on the charges if they really can get a win or not. And with that, though, all the time, they still want the endorsement of the police departments and the FOP.
I understand.
So that's the whole game they're playing.
So you don't think that the DA is saying, if we go with, so I'm not saying we're not in his mind, but some people argue, and I heard what you said. I just want to be clear and just restate it. So the DA can't be saying, if we come with these heavy charges, there's a chance this officer may walk. There's no chance he's thinking that, right?
Well, I can't say because I'm not in his mind, but ask this question right here. How many times have you seen, and we need to go look at this DA's record and say, how many times have they put a lesser charge on a black person that's been accused?
Okay, but we're dealing with the police.
Right, but what I'm saying, but see, that's the issue. The whole thing is that we run and the ball is moving down the field. Initially, we were happy as the black community saying, oh, they got arrested. Then we saw a couple go to trial and we didn't get convictions. Now we moved the ball saying, arrest don't mean anything. Charges don't mean anything. We want convictions now.
Right. So what happens though, and we'll get off this, but what happens, they go after the first degree murder and then he gets off.
So wait, let me just give a little context here. So in addition to what Jerry is saying about looking at the individual record of this DA, that's very, very important because it keeps it hyper local. But you also have to look at how many police officers or former officers who have been charged with first or second degree murder have been convicted. And that number is, I think, exceedingly low, like next to nothing. So because their jobs allow for the use of deadly force. And so it's very hard to square intent with, their responsibility in the moment, so on and so forth. And then when they corrupt the crime scene or allow for something to lapse for weeks and months, and then they can't even figure out what they're looking at. In the case of, Breonna Taylor, we got 2 months worth of evidence, 2 months worth of, negligence happening there. So that's part of why these lesser charges are sought. And the manslaughter charge is also very important because we know, if nothing else, that we have a dead person. Mm-hmm. So the manslaughter charge is key because there's no refuting the fact that George Floyd has been killed.
Right. I mean, the thing is that he sat there, the cop was looking around with his hand in his pocket. He was handcuffed, right?
He was already detained. It was totally unnecessary for him to sit on his neck.
So the DA, shouldn't somebody else step in above the DA then when we're looking exactly at what
well, yes, when we look at the federal, we look at the Department of Justice for these situations, but look at our administration. Bill Barr is not going to come in and say, you know what, this is a hate crime and we're taking it from here. They're not going to do that.
Okay.
And that's why it's important for us to vote in federal elections, because who we
Right.
get appointed as our AG is important. I mean, that's exactly what happened to former AG Eric Holder. He started to investigate law enforcement on a federal level, and he ended up getting shut down and pushed out.
So let me just say thank you, because you addressed my question. That's I wanted to know what this was really about, and you so precisely explained to me, because I wanted to make sure I was a fit, because I don't really fit the political part. That's
Okay.
why I wanted to ask.
And one more thing, you can also, I'm gonna say that so we can wrap up, is that this is also the police department where the Somalian police officer went to jail for shooting a white woman when he was startled.
Right. That's right.
Other thing, Tish, wrap it up if you got anything else.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jerry. So listen, hold on a second. So sorry. Thanks to everyone for joining us this week and for sticking in with us as well. I think a lot of great information was shared today, and we also see some new people that came on. So please join us on Messenger, because we have the group Brilliant Minds Advocating for the Advancement of Black People, and we would love for you to join. Anything that you put in the private chat today, please add it to the group, because that way it is shared with the group at large and all of the members. Also, when you join the group, or feel free to contact me, Jerry, any one of our group members directly, so that we can add you. If you have any trouble identifying the group, we would love for you to join. Someone asked when the next call is going to be. Generally, we do try to keep the calls on Saturdays at 12 noon, which allows people on the West Coast to join at 9, and is a good time across the board for other people to join in from other time zones. So we announce in the group when there's going to be a call. We actually have a new NYU professor that Garrett has expert on police brutality that Garrett will be sitting down with, and that will probably take place next Saturday at 12 noon, but that will be announced in the group. And again, if you have any questions or any issues, please reach out to us. And finally, what we definitely want to do is encourage you to connect, as Mary Datcher said, with your local government. Find out who is locally responsible for affecting your life directly. That is critical. Black folks do not participate as a whole statistically in local elections. As Mary stated in the comments, this is an election year. It's critical that we're involved and we make our voices heard. And as April said earlier, listen, we're not just going to hand our vote to Joe Biden just because he's the only candidate that is halfway, somewhat making sense in this whole thing. Doesn't mean that we're not voting for Joe Biden. It just means that we want to know, what are you going to do for Black people? And we have the right to ask that. We need to be really clear about that, okay? Because it's becoming muddled in that, well, you just need to vote for Joe Biden. But that's not how it works. What are you going to do for us? Yeah, we get that you aren't him. You aren't Donald Trump, the white supremacist. But what you need to get specific. What are you doing for Black people? And there's nothing wrong with being clear about that question. So again, thanks everybody for joining in. If you have any questions, jump into the chat in the group. If you can't find the group, find us and we'll add you to the group. Give us your email and we'll add you to the email list, and we're happy to have you on. Have a great weekend.